All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Hi, Fritz. How are you doing?
Fine, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I have four bottles of Arietta open in front of me, so this evening is already going pretty well. But for anyone at home, I'm Vanessa Conlin. I'm the head of wine for Wine Access, and I'm joined here tonight by my great friend, former boss, Fritz Hatton of Arietta. And we're going to have a chat about, well, whatever comes to mind. I have a feeling wine is definitely on the docket and music is definitely going to be discussed. But no matter what, we're here to answer questions. So if you're watching from home and you'd like to ask Fritz a question, you can type it in the chat and we will answer it over the course of the next half hour or so. So Fritz, are you have the white keys open as well?
I do. Whoopsie. I have the white key. Well, I have four glasses sitting here. You can't see them all, but you will one at a time.
Well,
Uh,
you're ahead of me, so I feel like I need to pour a glass since you have some
oh,
wine in your glass.
that's
So
much
for
more
anyone
dramatic.
at home's the 2018 vintage of the Arietta on the White Keys, which we will discuss momentarily. But first, Fritz, cheers. Thank you so
Cheers,
much
Vanessa.
for Thank you for joining me virtually. I'm sorry that we're not in face to face, but at least virtue of the internet, we can still enjoy a glass of wine together and catch up.
Well,
So,
cheers.
cheers.
So this is, oh, first of all, it's a great way to start a night, the sun having just gone over the yardarm. And this is the white wine of Arietta. We make Bordeaux style blends here in Napa. Although interestingly, the White Keys is part Sonoma, part Napa. It's a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. Most of the Sauvignon Blanc comes from Sonoma Mountain, up about 700 feet above Glen Ellen. Very cool, gently sloping site, the Farina Vineyard. Slopes to the northeast, and we pick it 2 or 3 weeks after most of Sauvignon Blanc is picked in Napa. And the fruit is really intense and very bright. And that's how we like the wine to start out. We want you to take a sip and salivate immediately and really excite your palate and startle it awake for what is ought to be a night of fabulous wine drinking and great food. Let
Well,
this be, it's the curtain raiser.
it is. Well, my palate is awake. I am ready to talk. And again, thank you for joining us. So I think probably we're ready to start. Anyone who's just joined in the last few minutes, thanks for being here. We're here to talk about wine and whatever you want to talk about. So enter your questions in the chat and we will answer them. But my name is Vanessa Conlin, head of wine for Wine Access, and this is Fritz Hatton, proprietor of Arietta Wine, and also a great friend of mine. And actually, my very first boss in terms of having a job at a winery. And I think correct me if I keep me honest here, Fritz, but I think that I was your first full-time non-production employee. At least
That
I
is
hope that's true
correct.
because that's what I tell people. I think that's
That
right.
is correct. We
Okay.
established a payroll for you.
Well, I have a very hard-hitting question to ask Fritz, which is why on earth did you hire me?
Well, I could see, well, first of all, we had the musical connection, and
Yes.
that's how Arietta had its beginnings. It was a connection between the Hattons and a very musical family, the Guards, and wine was a given. So that was back in the early 90s. When we met you, we immediately knew about the music and your passion for wine and desire to learn about wine was an incredible combination. And that's what we're all about here is, well, classical music, of course, music in all its forms, but primarily classical music and great winemaking in the traditional styles of Europe, which is where we gain our inspiration.
Well, and of course, where you mentioned music and your love for music, and John Consgard, which was your original winemaker and partner, right, in Arietta. But one of the stories that I really love about it is the story behind the name of On the White Keys, your white wine. So would you mind telling anyone at home how this particular wine was named?
Well, first I should tell you how Arietta was named. And of course, music being a given, my wife Karen, we were struggling over a name. It's hard to name a brand, and so we sort of picked away at it for a year, and finally we had to name it because we had to bond the winery. And Karen said, "Look in your music books." And so I looked again, and serendipitously, I had a stack of music in the car heading to the Consgards, and I threw open the volume on the top, and it was the Beethoven Sonata Volume 2, and it fell open to the Arietta movement of the last Beethoven Piano Sonata. So there it was, right in front of me. It was incredible. It was a great eureka moment, and everyone agreed right away that was it. It's a beautiful name. It's an extraordinary piece of music, which in and of itself serves as an inspiration for great winemaking. So that was in 1998. And scroll forward to 2005, we were buying out the Consgards as they found their estate up on Atlas Peak, and we decided we should have our own white wine for Arietta. And with John's help, we brought in Andy Ericsson to take over the winemaking. And we said, well, we should have our own white wine. But, we make Bordeaux style blends, so it should be a white Bordeaux style blend. And for us, that means Sauvignon Blanc mostly with some Semillon. So Andy ran out and found, in very short order, a marvelous vineyard, the Farina vineyard, which had just been regrafted back to Sauvignon Blanc, and came running back and said, I found the Sauvignon Blanc. And John, who was still very much involved, said, well, gosh, let's call Larry Hyde and have him save his oldest Semillon vines for us. He was in the process of ripping out all the Semillon vines. And so with this stop the wrecking ball call, Larry agreed to save his little 3/4 acre block of Semillon planted in 1980. And those are the components. Of course, now we had to name the wine. What were we going to call it? We didn't want to call it Sauvignon Blanc. We could. The wine has always been at least 3/4 Sauvignon Blanc, but it tastes different. It has the brightness of the Sauvignon Blanc from the hillside side of Sonoma Mountain, but it has this grand finish from the Semillon to round it out at the end. So we thought, well, we should give it a fanciful name, and let's see if it can be related to Arietta somehow. So as I was trying to get to sleep, 2 a.m. one morning, and music was turning over in my head, I realized, playing the Arietta theme, that the melody went on and on and on without touching a black key on the piano. That it was all played on the white keys. And bingo, light bulb, thought cloud, everything. And so on the white keys, and it seemed kind of quirky, but it relates to the Arietta theme very closely, and it has really become almost a brand unto itself as the White Keys, which is a white Bordeaux style blend, not just a Sauvignon Blanc. So if you play the Arietta movement, and I can just go over here and demonstrate this for you here, because we just happen to have a Steinway in the office. Who wouldn't have a Steinway in the office if they could, right? So
Every office should have one.
Yeah.
And it should be.
Right hand is the melody. This is the Arietta theme. So on and on and on, 32 measures, all in the white keys, the melody. And there it is. So you have the full story.
Well, I was going to tell everyone at home that you're a very accomplished pianist, but you've just proven that for me. But I recall hearing you play that before, and gosh, that gets really devilishly hard after a few pages, doesn't it?
All right. Well, that's like You're throwing down the gauntlet.
That wasn't a challenge, but okay.
And it gets jazzy. So I really just play it in the home when I have a couple of glasses of wine in me, or when I get the dare from people like you.
No extra charge at home for the concert, but thank you, Fritz. I'm gonna pour the quartet in my glass as we're chatting.
Okay.
But speaking of wine and music, I find there are so many musicians who end up going into wine later, or musicians have a shared love of. They also are very passionate about wine, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why that is.
Well, there has been a lot of sort of philosophic or phenomenological discussion of the relationship of music to wine. And of course, there's a lot of terminology that overlaps. I mean, it's harmonic, there's counterpoint, there's tension, there's balance, there's voicing, there's layering. Well, more recently, brain scientists who share the interest in wine and music have researched what part of the brain is stimulated by the pleasure of music and the pleasure of wine. And it turns out that pleasure, the pleasure of both of those influences, wine and music, is processed in precisely the same part of the brain. So that much has been established, and I know more research is being done. Some wags will say, well, we couldn't pass organic chemistry, so, we became music majors or English majors in my case, and we got into the wine business because, we can BS our way, and we don't have to be so precise with wine, which, of course, is one of the glories. You could never define precisely the taste of wine. I mean, the closest you could come is you, Vanessa, as a new master of wine. You've worked very, very hard at that over the last decade.
Thank you.
But in the end, will always be an element of artistry and subjectiveness to wine, which is something that really we all can share. I mean, it means we all can share it. The fact that there is no absolutely right answer.
Yes.
So you're right. I mean, think of a lot of rock musicians that are really into wine. They made wines themselves, or they have commissioned great winemakers to make wine in conjunction with them, and they're probably involved in the blending, and so there is a lot of overlap. But there is one thing I would like to say about the relationship of wine and music, and that is, to me, a particular wine does not suggest a particular piece of music. A lot of people play the game, well, what music would you listen to with this particular wine? And for me, it's kind of a higher level, more philosophic discussion of what what makes a wine great and what makes music great. And in the case of the Arietta, as an example, here's a great piece of music that starts with something very natural and serene and relatively simple, and adds one by one layers on top of it, and underneath it create this rich tapestry, and subdivides the rhythm so it gets richer and more expansive, and finally takes us to a state of nirvana and stasis, which anyone practicing Buddhist will appreciate. And what is it? I mean, that's something that the greatest pieces of music should do and the greatest wine should do. And that's what wine and music share to me at the high level. And I'm interested in great wine and great music, and you can call me a snob, I guess, if you want. But great classical music and great wine, those are the principles that they share.
Yeah. We actually have a question from a viewer at home, and this is absolutely delicious. It's a 2016 vintage of the Arietta Quartet Napa Valley red wine. But John, who is watching from home, has a question for you, which is, which came first, the music or the wine?
Gosh, they weren't far apart. I was taken to classical music concerts by my grandmother, who was a widower, so I was her date at age 4. I started playing the piano at 7. But my father was a Francophile, and I think my parents would mix. My memory is they would mix water with Beaujolais for us as early as the age of 9 or 10. So we had wine around. I think really music came first for me, but wine not long after.
Got it. And one more question about the on the white keys is from Melanie is, how long can you age it?
Well, our favorite vintage for current drinking is the 2011, interestingly enough. The acidity in the wine and the fact that it is barrel fermented in 1/3 new French oak barrels gives the wine a lot of protection against oxidation. And interestingly, the White Keys is one of the only white wines and New World white wines that I am confident about saying, it's better after 5 years in the bottle. I mean, I think really best, it's good from the get-go, but I think it's more interesting, it's more harmonious, it rounds out a little bit, it gets more lift after 3 to 5 years in the bottle, and it's good for 7 or 8. Anyway.
Yeah. I think I've tasted, back when I was working with you, I mean, we were tasting older vintages of White Keys, and they were phenomenal. I was always just floored at how well they could age. So I think, I mean, a decade at least, if not beyond, for that wine. I'm going to pour the H block, and we can talk about that. So the H block is from Hudson Vineyards, so it's Cabernet Franc and Merlot, co-fermented. Is that correct, Fritz?
Yeah, co-fermented in most vintages. We have to be able to pick the Merlot and the Cabernet Franc within 4 days of each other, and that's 80% of the time that's the case, as it was in this vintage. So we get our 6 or 7 tons of H block. It's only 2.4 acres the block, and this is the founding block for Arietta, planted in '86 by Lee Hudson. So we pour those into a tank, and we go into our Merlot block, and we look for just enough to fill the rest of the tank, up to about 9 or 10 tons worth. So that is the core wine, if you will. Typically about 70% Cabernet Franc and 30% Merlot, depending on the vintage. So after that, they ferment together. So John Kongsgaard loved the idea of co-fermentation because he thought it would create longer phenolic chains and give you ultimately a more harmonious palate impression. And so we do it, and the only blending decisions we have to make after that are, do we add more Merlot, and do we use the press wine? So it's pretty much, joined at birth, and we've been doing it since the beginning, so we know what happens. The first time or two you do it, it's a little riskier, of course, because you can't pull them apart once you have them together.
That's right. You're committed at that point. You're all in.
You're in. Absolutely. So this 2013 actually is relatively higher in Merlot than average. It's typically about 60% Cabernet Franc, 40% Merlot, but again, it varies by the vintage. And in this vintage, I recall we added a little bit more Merlot. So it's 54 Franc and 46 Merlot. And this is a really special wine and distinctive, both for us and the vintage, in that it really is made as an ager. The 13s are generally known to be, really intense and with a kind of a very firm spine of tannins and whatnot. And in this vintage, Andy got involved with Mayacamas, and of course, there was a lot of attention paid to recreating the mountain style or making wines that really last the way a lot of the old California Cabernets do. So we didn't pick this quite as ripe as we might have. So the wine has tremendous point and fragrance and shape. It's more of a Grecian statue than a Roman statue, if you appreciate the difference. It's a little bit sleeker and elliptical and beautifully and very Bordelais, I would say, as the Arietta wines go. I don't know. What do you think, Vanessa?
I mean, I'm just absolutely in love with this wine, and we actually have someone watching from home who's enjoying it right now with us. I think John wants to know, why did you decide to work with Cabernet Franc? It works so beautifully with Merlot. But I think, I don't want to answer for you, but coming from your appreciation for Great Bordeaux and the right bank, I would imagine that was the inspiration.
Well, it was John's idea to, when he left Newton, to kind of sneak away, not sneak away, or take this one little block with him. When he worked at Newton, he had the grower relationships, but he was a great friend of Peter Newton. So when he left, he said, the only block I really want to take is the little H block of all the vineyard blocks that they worked with. And it was because John thought it was so distinctive and so great on its own, but a wine had never been made featuring it. So he wanted to make a wine featuring this extraordinary block, which Michel Rolland, who was consulting for Newton at the time, also thought was great and had brought back to Bordeaux to show his buddies that he thought really great wine could be made in Napa. So that's part of the lore of this block. So it was about this Cabernet Franc block and wanting to make a wine around it. And then at the outset, we said, well, should we make just a Cabernet Franc wine, or should we blend it with Merlot the way it would be done in Saint-Emilion? And we decided to add Merlot in the beginning, but feature the Cabernet Franc by making sure it was the dominant part of the blend. So it is essentially a reverse Saint-Emilion style blend, the most famous example of which is Cheval Blanc. And it was not our intent to copy Cheval Blanc, but that would be what would be done in Saint-Emilion, is to blend the two varietals, the Merlot adding or assuring kind of a roundness, a plumpness of the center of the wine, and then, of course, the Cabernet Franc adding the somewhat more exotic aromatic elements and the touch of, if you can, detect it sometimes, a very faint touch of cooked herb, which is a marker for Cabernet Franc.
Absolutely.
So there it was, and I know that John was very keen to make a right bank style wine, and in fact, we never made Cabernet Sauvignon until '03. We were really right bankers at that point.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And you mentioned, of course, John Consgard being the first winemaker, and then Andy Ericsson, who's your current winemaker. He took over in '05, if memory serves. Is that correct?
Correct. That was a handover vintage, and that was the first vintage for the White Keys. And '06 was the first vintage that Andy made from Soup to Nuts. And he is still our winemaker. We're so fortunate to have had a quarter-century run with two winemakers, John Consgard and then Andy Ericsson.
Yeah.
So we're honored and kind of stewards of this winemaking
Two not only the most extraordinarily talented winemakers, but also just the nicest darn people you'll ever meet. But what was it about Andy specifically that made you want to put your trust in him after John?
Well, it was John who knew Andy because Andy had worked for John for a year at Newton, and John had followed him, and he was a great student at Davis, and he was Harlan's pick right out of UC Davis to become assistant winemaker. Then went to Staglin as winemaker, and then decided he wanted to be his own boss. So he became a consulting winemaker, started to work on a few embryonic projects. And when John and I agreed that, well, the Hattons and Cones, we would buy them out in a friendly transaction, I asked John, well, who do you recommend to make the wine? So we really trusted John, but Andy was marvelous from the get-go, just wonderful to work with, and became a good friend in short order. And so there we've been ever since.
Yeah. So I'm going to pour the '09 Cabernet Sauvignon in my glass. But as I'm doing that, we do have one more question that just came in about the H block, which is from John, who wants to know, what would you pair with this?
Well, I think pretty much any, red meat or white meat. I would just be careful that the wine is slightly sweeter than anything on the plate. Don't use a sweet sauce, but obviously beef, lamb, even duck, as long as you don't use a too sweet a sauce. The great universal match, I think, for Bordeaux style wine is roast chicken. There's just nothing like it. It seems so kind of obvious in a way.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Fritz. I was just thinking before we started chatting tonight about my time working with you and Karen. Karen is Fritz's wife and co-proprietor. And I remember that occasionally in your backyard, we used to host the staff of various restaurants to try the wines and, get to know you. And I remember that the staff from the French Laundry came over, and Karen, I don't know how she had the cojones. She cooked roast chicken for the whole staff of the French Laundry. Do you remember that? And it was outstanding. I mean, where does she get them to try that? But she did it. So
she did, and she's done it many times since. In fact, after we're done, I have to go take the leftover chickens from Sunday's roast and get them in the pot to start chicken soup. We have, at one point, we had 20 chickens in a coop in our backyard. We're on a quarter-acre lot in Lena, and they all had to go at a certain point. But now Karen has reconstituted a small flock of 5. Sometimes they're right at the door here. They're right out there. They free range in our backyard. So you have to step carefully, but chickens are very much part of our lives. We're getting about 5 eggs a day from them. So if anyone wants to stop by in a socially distant way, we can leave you some out front. So,
you can stand
chickens and Bordeaux style wine is a great combo.
Yeah. So speaking of Karen, one of the things I wanted to ask you is you are truly a family business. So what, in your opinion, are the kind of the challenges and the benefits of being a family business?
Well, the benefits are that, of course, you can really pursue a passion. People aren't looking over your shoulder the way a hedge fund investment firm might, or other stockholders. But so it's great in that sense. And also, I think in terms of developing a real unique or distinctive personality for the wines, that is allowed to flourish, particularly if you have a collaborative winemaker like Andy Ericsson, who is so willing to move in one's direction, if as long as it's a good direction. He won't let you go astray. So I think for the personality of the wines, the sole ownership or the family ownership is a wonderful thing. Relationships are very important in the business, and to have a long-term family relationship with growers and winemakers and suppliers, rather than a steady parade of different owners or corporations or whatnot, is very, very rewarding. The downside is, of course, we work in small quantities, and the production is not very efficient. We buy in small quantities, so we don't get quantity discounts. And also, it's in terms of the secondary market or the resale or wholesale market, it's much more difficult to get the attention of a reseller, even if you make great wine. If you only offer someone 30 or 50 cases to sell, it's not going to make their Christmas. So you really have to develop a loyal following of clients, and particularly direct clients, to make sure that you have stability in the business.
Yeah, I will say though, Arietta has seemed to always just be beloved by sommeliers. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's flattering to hear you say that. It may be because we're a little tied to, or maybe hung up by, if you will, older traditions in wine. And we see ourselves in terms of sort of a continuity of winemaking that looks back to old world styles and moves forward, rather cautiously, I would say. And we look at our wines in an international context. If I go to the Cellar, what are we going to drink? Okay, is it going to be Arietta, or are we going to have a bottle of Burgundy, or are we going to have a bottle of someone else's Napa wine or an Oregon Pinot? What is it going to be, and what's going to give us the most pleasure? So we have a broad view of wine, and I'm very lucky to have had many opportunities to taste great wines and 45 years of working in and out of the wine business, and as a collector, and well, not a collector, really a friend of collectors. So that experience, combined with having winemakers like John Kongsgaard and Andy Ericsson, and my wife Karen, who's a fabulous, fabulous natural palate, and so very much a colleague in that regard, in addition to other aspects of the business, is maybe that's what they see and what they taste in the wines.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine, we haven't even mentioned that, you're, one of, I'd say, the world's most famous wine auctioneers. So you're tasting, some of the best wines in the world from all over the world. So I imagine that, that guides your palate as well in terms of the direction of the wine. And Andy's such a great collaborator in that he, as you mentioned before, he really is such a great partner in that he doesn't make an Andy Ericsson wine. He makes a wine that you want.
Well, yes. Okay. That's true. It's his fingerprints are definitely on the wine. I can't say that, particularly as a wine taster. My experience is really drinking finished wines and a lot of mature wines. Andy, it's all Andy when the wine is raw, when it's fresh, when it's being made, when it's in tank and going to barrel. I kind of know what the results are, what I'd like to see as the results, but getting there is Andy and now our assistant winemaker, Patrick Nyholt, who's so dedicated and skillful and detail-oriented. We're very, very lucky to have them.
Yeah. So question from someone at home is, Melanie would like to know, have you ever considered doing a 100% Cabernet Franc?
We have. We've looked at the H block from time to time, and so we'll say, well, okay, how does this taste if we make a lot, which we have on a few occasions that is separate? How does it taste on its own and with the addition of Merlot? And it's generally the addition of Merlot makes it a little bit more interesting to us, a little more layered and complex. There is one wine out there, very scarce in the marketplace, but if anyone ever finds it, that is 100% Cabernet Franc. That's the 2008 H block. And the reason there's no Merlot is that the Merlot was so far behind in its maturation that we decided not to use it at all in that vintage. So and it's a great kind of wine to bring to a blind Cabernet Franc tasting. It's a great fooler.
Love it. Well, this the '09 Cabernet Sauvignon that I'm drinking is extraordinary, and it's Coombsville. So, can you tell me what is it about Coombsville that you enjoy?
Well, we moved our primary Cabernet source for this wine to Coombsville, to the Meteor Vineyard in the '07 vintage. And the vineyard was planted in 1999 by Mike Wolf for the Schulers, and it's an extraordinary vineyard in the heart of Coombsville, beautifully planted, perfect exposure. It kind of undulates to the southwest, and we have our own 1.7 acre block. That's pretty tiny, so we really, in a good vintage, we make only 300 cases of this wine, but it's our best Cabernet block. And in 7, 8, and 9, we blended it with a little bit of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. We have not done that since the 10 vintage, when it was 100% Franc. If anything, we've added either Verdot or a little bit of Merlot since then. So this has a little bit of Franc and Petit Verdot in it. And interestingly, in a recent vertical of 7, 8, and 9, this was the most elegant and on point of the three wines for current drinking. So if anyone has '09 Arietta Cabernet Sauvignon, get it out. Doesn't need to air too long, and it's like a ballerina on point right now.
That's beautiful.
Right there.
Another question from someone at home. I'm paraphrasing, but was there a moment or a wine that made you fall in love?
Well, yes, I had my wine epiphany, as many people call it, and I had it relatively young, which is why I have been chasing this dream or following this passion for so long. So I was 20. Between my sophomore and junior years at college, I helped my godmother's oldest son, who's like a brother to me, start a wine and cheese department in their store in little old Grand Haven, Michigan, where I grew up. And so needless to say, we had to check some of the inventory for quality control as it was coming in. So one night we took some bottles, including a bottle of Burgundy, out to my godmother's terrace, had a marvelous dinner, and opened it. It was a bottle of 1966 Corton Clos de Bois. That's my memory. And it was just extraordinary. It was like, I don't know, my eyes opened to a world that I never, a sensual world that I had never seen or experienced before, where wine becomes so interesting and so multidimensional and such a sophisticated socializing force that the rest of your life is spent trying to recreate that moment. So I do confess it was a bottle of red Burgundy that got me going at a very serious level all these years ago.
Oh. Well, it's so kind of you to spend this time with us. I have one more question for you, which is not about wine, but back to music. And that is there one piece of music that you cannot listen to without crying?
Ooh, gosh. Well, the Adagietto from Mahler's Fifth Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
Opera.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Um, oh, you're going to have to cut and take a pause here
Well,
without.
so for me, Beethoven seventh, second movement,
Okay.
um, second act of La Traviata, fourth act of La Traviata, um, last act of La Boheme, last act of most operas, frankly, by, by Verdi or Puccini, um, Brahms, Brahms Third Symphony.
Wow, you have quite a catalog of these. We could keep you teary-eyed for days.
Wow. Anyway, it's so fun to talk with you, Fritz. And again, I wish that we could be face to face in the backyard with the chickens and the dogs and the cats and the family. But you know, we'll get back there. But in the meantime, it's great that wine can still bring us all together and inspire great conversation. So thank you so much. Please give your love to the family and my love to your family. I mean, and cheers. Thanks,
All
Fritz.
right. See you, Vanessa.
Cheers.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Great to join you and all your Wine Access team. Thank you so much.
Cheers. All right.
Great to be with you. Cheers.
Bye bye.